Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. This is Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you. I want to remind you, as always, that this podcast is not a substitute for mental health therapy. It is for education and entertainment purposes. So please contact a therapist in your area to work on your unique issues. So I have another treat for you this episode, as we are talking with somebody who I really enjoyed their work on a couple of TTR tabletop role-playing game shows that came up. And let me just start with how this came about. So I was on Twitter, and one of the people I follow is Eliza Pearl, and who I will also be reaching out to shortly. And she was talking about a show that she had recently been working on, and it was called Imbrujelia. And she was talking about doing a Call of Cthulhu game that was Afro-Latino centered. And as soon as I saw that, it's like, I must go and find this. And I watched all 4 episodes, very much enjoyed it, and then realized that, oh, there was more in this series. And this is from, if you go onto YouTube, you're looking for the Good Time Society. And the particular set of shows is called the Calyx, which, if I remember correctly, is spelled Calgxy, close to that. And so I started watching, just working my way through the catalog, because as it is, I just can't watch anything live with my schedule and so forth. So I watch a lot of VOD. And so I got to a certain set of these, which was called, one was called Genus Locus, another was called America. And in both of these episodes, one particular character stood out to me. It was played by, the character's name was Millie, but it was played by the brilliant Bridgett Jeffries, who I have here today as our interview. She also did another one for a charity stream called Servants of the Lake. So Bridgett Jeffries lives in Columbus, Ohio. She heard of Call of Cthulhu about 10 years ago and has been madly in love with the game and horror genre ever since. Bridgett prefers to play, run, and write story-driven, character-focused, and combat-light horror games. She has a history degree from the Florida State University, as so many of her games have a strong historical influence with a twist of mythos. Bridgett's scenarios can be found on the Miskatonic University repository, and some of those are Sorrow in Severo, Carousel of Fear, and in issue 2 of BA, not familiar with what this one is, but it's called Beast of Gazadron. I'll let her give you the better pronunciation of it. I mean, here's my dyslexia coming up again. Bridgett found a horror gaming club, Symphony Entertainment Games and Art, which solely focuses on horror-based systems. You can check out details. Of her events online at symphonyentertainment.com or at conventions around the Northeast United States. You can check out Bridgett's Infectious Laugh on two-time Emmy, and that's ENNIE, award-winning podcast, the Miskatonic University podcast, where she serves as a co-host. If you're interested in writing for the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu community content, Bridgett invites you to connect with her as a community ambassador for Chaosium Incorporated for support, compliance, and encouragement. Bridgett, welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, which in some ways probably could easily sound like a Call of Cthulhu game setting.
It does feel like a Call of Cthulhu scenario. I love the title. Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure for you being here, and thank you for taking the time to join us. And as always, this podcast is about mental health, and especially for those of us that are geeks, nerds, that are in this area that are of color.
Right.
So my first standard question is, how did you get here? Beyond what I wrote in your bio there.
Yeah. And then just really fast before I hop into that, just for clarification's purposes, how should I address you? Do you want Perry? Would you like Dr. Clark? Talk to me. How do I address you?
Perry is fine.
Perry works? Okay. My dad and my brother and my grandfather are all a line of Perrys, so that works. You're right in the family already.
Well, especially because that's usually a name that doesn't come up as often. So
no, not at all. Yeah. My it's grandfather Perry the second, and my brother is Perry the third. Yeah, so whole family of Perrys. We're right in line. How did I get to where I am now? So it was kind of interesting. I have been running tabletop role-playing games for better course of maybe 15 years or so. I always wrote my own material, mostly because I was very insecure and not confident enough to run someone else's material. I was afraid that, whatever, I won't back into all of the insecurities, but I was afraid to run other people's stuff. So I felt more comfortable running my own things, my own little control issues. And one of my scenarios that I ran in the convention circuit continued to gain in popularity. People loved it. People talked about it. And then one day, Jared Smith from Bayat Al-Azif, he has a magazine for Cthulhu, Mythos, that entire genre. So games, articles, movies, things of that nature. He reached out to me. He said, hey, I was talking to some friends and they said that you have this game called Beasts of Gévaudan, which laziness ensues. Yeah, there's your pronunciation on it. A native French speaker is probably going to say I'm saying it wrong too, but that's the best I've got. Side note, very lazy creative scenario on that one. It's a phenomenal scenario, but Perry, have you seen the movie Brotherhood of the Wolf?
I watched part of it before I remember going to the theater to watch it, and then the film broke midway through.
Yes. Yeah, the whole scenario is based on Brotherhood of the Wolf, which is then in turn based on actual events about a lupine creature laying waste to I think it was 17th century France. Anyways, Jared reached out to me. He says, hey, I would like you to write the scenario up for me. And my initial reaction was like, okay, I'm flattered, but I'm also very overwhelmed and intimidated by that idea because I've never written up a scenario before. I've never been in even a semi-professional space with this where like I actually take what's in my head and off of note cards and put it into print. And he said to me a series of things that really launched me to where I am. Because everything else is like a cool little montage that brings me onto your recording right now. But Jared was very intentional about trying to find female voices. He was very intentional about trying to find Black voices. And so that led him to me. And he says, like, listen, I understand if you're scared. I understand that you're overwhelmed. I understand that you're intimidated. And I understand that you've never done it before. I will walk you through it step by step. I promise you, I won't abandon you. I won't leave you, but we need to get more of you, more of your voices, more of your demographics out in rotation. And just because you haven't done it before should not be the thing that keeps you back. I will help you. So because of Jared at Bayat Al-Azif, I published my very first scenario. Once I got over the hurdle, it was just boom,
right on from there.
Boom, 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 boom. Yep.
Very nice. Very nice. So you've illustrated a number of things, aspects in that about the need for more female voices, which I'll be frank, I think some of the best players are women in the game space. And two, the aspect of more for us that are of color.
Yeah.
I know that I'm also one of those that I've helped fund the kickstart Harlem Unbound and Haunted West.
Yes, with Spivey.
Yes, and I so want to play those as of have had a chance yet to do. But how that notion of also this genre of Cthulhu, which let's also be frank, was written by a very racist man, but that's also not surprising given the time he lived in.
Hashtag facts.
Yeah, any material written before, let's say 1970, 2000 is going to be laced with a lot of racism. Yep. Which also makes it at this point hard to enjoy for those of us who recognize what's being said there. And that also plays not only into what the genre is providing, what the material is providing, but how is that also conflicting with where our mental health is when we want to enjoy this material, and yet we're also dealing with, can I deal with the aspect of this racism that's present? Right. They're interfering with my ability to enjoy this fantasy.
Right. Well articulated and well said.
Thank you. And so so there's another point of why we need to generate more material ourselves that is better accounting for that. So what's been your experience beyond what you've written so far with this aspect of recognizing mental health for yourself?
Oh, there is so much to unpack there, but I think I can narrow that scope by at least going, you specify for myself. So I believe inherently we all have an inner voice inside that has an idea, a belief, a moral compass, something that needs to be let out, that needs to be put into the universe. And that could be, this is Bridgett's personal perspective. And that could be manifested in a lot of ways. That could be manifested in the way that you parent. It could be manifested in the way that you create. It can be manifested in the jobs that you choose. But there's something in each of us that we want to bring out, that we want to share with the world. I just believe all of us have that thing. And one of my things, I have a few because God bless me, I'm all over the place, but
aren't we all?
Right. One of my things that I really enjoy when it comes to a storytelling perspective, when it comes to writing games, running games, is I love to bring emotion out. Like hopeless horror can get very exhausting and very daunting, especially if you look at the last 3 years that we've been living in, which is effectively hopeless horror. But
well, I would put it more like last 6, but yeah.
Ooh, listen, I hope you guys can hear the snapping. So one of the things I love to bring out in my games is emotion, but you have to back into like, what is emotions in games and where are the lines that you can flirt with and play with when it comes to horror. So personally, for me, a lot of my games have a very strong emotional pulse. Like you read it in the bio. I'm very character focused, story driven, combat light. If you want to go blow up a dragon, by all means, go drop a 10d6 fireball on it. But if you're playing horror, you want to be in a vulnerable position. You want to have like the world coming at you with things that you can't explain, that you don't understand, but you're willfully going into it anyways. I love to lather that in emotion. But in order to do that, you have to actually think, what emotions can you relay safely that can still be fun when you're doing it across an RPG space? How far can you push grief? How double down can you actually do on joy before you lose the horror aspect of it? So from a mental health standpoint, I will definitely say my writing, every scenario reflects very strongly what that inner voice was saying to myself at the time that I wrote it. You read all my scenarios side by side, you can tell that I'm in different mental spaces each time.
Which is one of those key aspects that normally when I'm working with clients, one of the things I will tell them to do is write it down. So that it's not essentially a running loop in their head. It's being held by the paper, whether that is just write down the journal of the thoughts and the stream of thoughts, turn it into a prose, turn it into a poetry. It becomes a way of not having it taking up space in the head.
Right. You can release it. You can let it go. You can put it down for a second, revisit later. Yeah.
And that sounds like that's part of your, in its own way, your therapeutic process of doing this material. Yeah,
for sure. Because even when I go back and read some of my other scenarios, I'll go like, oh, I remember what I was going through when I wrote that. And, you can't help it when you're a creator, like, part of you bleeds into whatever you produce. And if you're paying attention close enough, at least to yourself, you can see those threads moving through.
Which is something that we're also in therapy is like looking at what are the threads that are connecting the various events, what are the threads connecting the various decisions that have been made in a person's life from childhood into adulthood.
Yep. What carries over? What left a lasting impression or a stain or a thread that you're just like, I didn't realize that was still on me. Let's unpack and dive into how that looks and what that means. Yep.
Very much so. So from that angle, what do you think about the materials that are coming out now, such as we spoke about Harlem Unbound and The Haunted West, but other materials in this aspect as well? What are you seeing there? Because there's only so much I can stay focused on that because I've got so many other things like being a therapist and running a business and all that.
My eyes are rolling like backwards in my head as I'm considering this. I'm gonna leap out with my initial impression to that question. So horror is my happy place. That's pretty much where I stay, whether it's Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu Dark, Alien the RPG, Vason, whatever. Horror is typically my happy place. That's where I do a lot of my work and spend a lot of my time. Perry, so I'm going to back into this one from a weird direction. So you and I discussed this very briefly. Sorry, hit the mic. You and I discussed this very briefly via email, and it's been an ongoing topic that since the pandemic hit, there's been a much larger, less prejudicial, open conversation about mental health, which is a blessing. That's an amazing thing. I love that transition. I feel like Bridget's impression in the horror space, with a lot more materials that we see coming out, people are feeling less afraid, more empowered, and more intentional about writing things from a POV, a point of view, a perspective that's not their own, and also approaching aspects of mental health in games and what that means, even down to the language. I remember Call of Cthulhu and a few other scenario or systems had even been called out. I was like, guys, we don't like that you named this mechanic insanity. We don't like that some of the side effects can be, bipolarism or, just going back and forth like that. So I love that the conversation is changing. People are standing up. There's even a more intentional focus to have accessibility in games, which I know isn't very specific to mental health, but I also think is right on par with mental health. Because when you're dealing with accessibility issues, if you can't reach the person, they can't enjoy the material. And when you take that extra step to reach the person, they feel seen, they're able to participate into the community, they become a part of the larger community, and that's all mental health. So I have seen a shift, Bridget, personally, since the pandemic broke, where these conversations are happening, and they're not just happening in your basement or like on your phone call with your buddy. They're happening in Discord. They're happening on Reddit. They're happening on companies' Facebook pages and Twitter. It's an open conversation. I personally am very here for it.
Beautiful.
Was that a ramble? Well. That felt like a ramble.
Hey, as far as I'm concerned, preach. Just let it preach. Because it is a truth. And I think that's also one of those things about beginning to recognize what it means for us, not only as BIPOC, but what it means for us in the geek and nerd space. Because again, so much of what we look at and enjoy these materials has often been said, oh, it's not black, you're not black enough, or Asian enough, or drop whatever particular identity you have, and it's not enough because you're taking an interest in horror, or you're taking an interest in science fiction, you're taking an interest in fantasy. Yeah. That somehow this is not a part of who we are, and yet cultures are reached this point by being part of that. By being part of that, by being a part of those stories, the originators of those stories. No, we were here the entire time. Which then also always brings up something I know I'm talking to clients, and usually when we're talking about relationships, it's like Disney sanitized stories have not exactly done us good. No, but I would love to hear you. I'm just curious if we have different perspectives on that. What's your stance? Well, my stance is, because if we go back and look at like the original Grimm fairy tales and so forth, they have some of the endings with that, which I do recommend everybody goes and looks at the actual source material. Cinderella, for example, is a lot bloodier when it comes to what happens to her stepsisters. Sleeping Beauty, also not exactly a pleasant ending story, what happens there. And from what I understand, Snow White, the Wicked Witch actually does get some comeuppance we get to see at the end of the story, compared to where everything stops with, oh, they lived happily ever after. Right. And the truth of the matter is, happily ever after, now what happens when the roof starts to leak? Little Billy's getting bullied at school. The mortgage is now due. How do we spin happily ever after into that? Because that's one of the realities of a relationship. Right. All of these stories are essentially that we've seen done by Disney and all of the others like that are snapshot moments. Well said. Yeah. And originally, so many of our stories, when we go away from that, were also sent as lessons about living in life.
Yeah.
And so when we remove these uncomfortable parts, we're going to remove the lesson and real purpose, because our oldest little teaching mechanism was story.
Mm.
At least that's my view.
No, I love it. I love it. I would love to chew on that one later. Beautifully articulated, by the way.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna chew on that one and see if I agree with you later on that one. There's a lot to unpack there, but I like it.
And so the stories that we're telling and playing in our games is part of it again. What is the lesson? Even though it's in some cases problem solving.
Right. That's dope. You actually pushed my cuticles back a little bit on that one. I was unprepared. Yeah, but that's dope. Well articulated and well said. Okay. Yep. I will continue to chew on that one, but I like it.
Mm-hmm. So when we throw in the therapy standpoint of, again, what's getting processed through writing the material down? How are we also getting that perspective on the lesson? Right.
Yeah. What are we walking into as far as our filters, or whether they're rose colored or not, into the application? Yep. Yeah, I would agree to that one. I'd agree to that one. Now, I will say one thing when it comes to role-playing games that I genuinely appreciate. So my family, God bless them, they're the most supportive things ever, but they still don't know what the hell a TTRPG is. They vaguely can understand it. They call it her gaming thing. And I love them for it. They're literally the best. My brother, and it might be a generational thing, has a little bit of a clearer explanation. If you ask him what gaming is, he goes, it's like, what does he say? He says, it's like telling campfire stories with a VR headset on. So it's this really cool experience where you can jump into someone else's shoes or another era in time or another universe or whatever, and you can play out the lives of these other people. And he was telling one of his frat brothers this one day, he made a statement. He's like, I actually think it's really cool because Bridgett does all of this really interesting historical research to make sure the perspectives are clear and that they're not the whitewashed perspectives, which is something I'm pretty proud of myself, honestly. He says, so it's really neat because she can throw a lot of these standard white male gamers, which is the majority of our industry, these white male gamers into the seat of somebody else and say, this is what life looks like for one of us marching forward, which is something I believe Chris Spivey has done beautifully with Harlem Unbound.
Yep, I have both editions.
Yeah, you was like, yeah, he did. Yeah, I think it's something that he did beautifully with Harlem Unbound. And if we stick with the VR perspective, which God bless my brother for this one, but hopping into someone else's shoes with a voice authentic that the author is like, is bringing that authenticity to it, I think in a way can develop empathy and understanding and give you an additional perspective on voices that aren't your own while you're kind of in a contained, isolated space, which empathy, which is something the world could use so much more of right now, is another strong undercurrent when you're talking about mental health. Because if you can walk off of one of Chris Spivey's games and go, okay, I understand from a mechanically gained position the disadvantages I'm at as a Black female, maybe I should look for those same trends that are going on today in my friends or people around me. And that's huge. And he was a bold one to jump out there and do it too.
Very much so. Yeah, because I know Harlem Brown also has essentially dealing with racial tension mechanic, which is not something found in many other games, especially for the setting. It's wonderful when we can also have the game where it's like, oh no, this is completely normal. We're living life like we are now, but one of those factors, as we saw, especially too with Lovecraft Country when it came out. And I admit that I haven't watched it just because there was only so much my capacity to take things in was Lena Waithe's Them.
Gotcha.
As well.
Okay. I haven't seen that. I need to get on that. You're the second person almost this week to say sorry. Keep going. Apologies.
Yeah, but again, well, there's again how much can then we can also modulate for ourselves in watching that. And coming right off of Lovecraft Country, I just was not in a space to go into Them.
Yeah.
And the relative standpoint that is truth for many of us is, when did the horrors actually end?
Mm.
Because we're still fighting much of that today, which adds into our mental health, which adds to why do we play some of these games, is to escape and have a different world where different choices get to be made.
Right. Yeah, the escapism is definitely a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just take that all in, folks.
Definitely a lot to unpack. I'm going to have a good time dissecting this one later on.
Definitely go find the original Brothers Grimm and look at what happens to Snow White and the Wicked Witch or Wicked Queen and so forth. She puts on quite a performance number, I understand, at the end of it.
Oof. Okay. Yeah, I will do. I'll put that on my list of, let's dive into that and see what it looks like for real.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that always sort of took me, especially why I was so interested in Harlem Unbound, was the notion that, again, when we look at most Lovecraft horror and so forth, it's usually white, it's usually New England, it's usually the rich and wealthy. Mm-hmm. What would have a Call of Cthulhu storyline have played out if we had been, as much as I hate to put it, in the antebellum South?
Ooh.
What would have played out if we were doing that during Reconstruction?
Yeah.
And even then, too, it's like, so why would anyone not be surprised if certain forces align with the elder gods against, if it means change?
Right.
There's always this assumption that everyone wants this to stay in this certain way, but wait a minute, you're making our lives hell. They're offering something else. Who's got the better deal?
Yeah. That puts me into the mind of, have you read, Bridgett, is it the Ballad of Tom?
Ballad of Black Tom?
Yes. Have you read that?
Yes, I have.
So that was that story parallel, or that book parallels what you're saying. Like, you know what? I'm going to take this racist BS. I'm going to flip it on its head, and I'm going to see what it looks like if I make the mythos work for me in my same perspective and go. Yeah. Which is a trip. It's also, Perry, listen, I have been playing with the idea of doing an antebellum South Lovecraft game for at least 2 years now. I kid you not. I've been playing with it so hard. I've run it. I haven't run it across any formal publishers, but I've run it across kind of like my my safety net of friends, my soundboarders, other people. And the majority of them are white. And I keep getting the same thing. Yes, you should absolutely do it. No, I'll never run it. Which is so much to unpack in itself, but we can actually backpedal from that. And Chris Spivey is going through the same thing right now. He's had this beautiful, succulent, award-winning Harlem Unbound with all of this research on, the Harlem Renaissance and these cool racial mechanics. And then you get white keepers who are just like, I'm just not comfortable running it. I'll love to read it. It's great content and we're super happy to have it, but I'm not going to put myself in that position with players that I don't know. One guy even told me, like, no, I have a couple Black people in my game. And listen, I hear what they go through on a daily basis at their job. I'm not about to run them through a racism mechanic in a game when they're trying to escape the bullshit that they have to deal with every day. So there's all these underlying conversations about the stories need to be told, should be told. But we're also, at least from a TTRPG standpoint, we're not producing a book or a movie that you can read, experience once and put it down, or maybe experience it by yourself. Ours is collaborative. We need other people to engage with the material. And if you put out the material and everyone's like, this is amazing, I'm never going to run it. Okay, well, it sits on a shelf. And where do you draw the lines between stories that need to be told, industry reputation, and market efficacy, monetization? And I'm personally exploring that line
with
now.
Your company.
Yeah, I'm exploring that line now. And that takes a lot of unpacking from a mental health standpoint, because I have to understand in myself how far I'm willing to go. I have to understand my boundaries, and I have to create more of those. My therapist and I are working on that. And I also have to have a very crystal clear vision of what I'm doing here.
Mm-hmm.
And it all takes introspection and a cost risk analysis of what you're willing to give or what you're willing to sacrifice for this thing that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a lovely place for us to take a break at.
Woo! Let's do it.
All right. So, folks, stay tuned for our second half here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Bridgett Jeffries. So we'll be back with you shortly. So just hang in there.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's the second half of this episode. I'm here with Bridgett Jeffries, who is the owner and operator of Symphony Entertainment, Gaming, and Arts here on, and we're talking on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist. So we've been having a broad conversation about gaming, mental health, being a BIPOC and dealing with racism, but also how our mental health is also helped by these games. One of the things that also appealed to me, is why I reached out, was also the fact that you're running your company, Symphony Entertainment, Art, Games, and Art, which is, again, one of those things that we don't usually get to hear as much when we're talking about entrepreneurship. It's usually, the wedding planner or the food vendor or this other services, but this environment too, dealing with the TTRPG space and the gaming space, being a woman of color, running a company that is focusing on this. I'm curious about what that's like. Yeah,
that's interesting. And I'm learning it as I go. But I will say, and I mentioned this in the first half, my family is a phenomenal resource and support. I'm super blessed to have them. So just from an entrepreneur standpoint, because I think this is super cute, and my brother and I unpack this pretty often. My parents were both blue collar workers. Mom was like a manager at Walmart. Dad was a firefighter, things of that nature. But they both always had side hustles. And I know you can't see me, guys, but I'm doing the air quotation things. Like we either had a paper route, or mom made video collages for the deceased to be played at funerals. And dad got, Jesus, my father, he had a tree cutting company. He had a pool management company. All these little side things that we had. So my brother and I grew up in an environment where our parents had the standard W-2 jobs, but they were always filling their downtime or their excess time with things they were passionate about that they could monetize. And, we're talking about 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And my parents didn't have the exposure to what a real quote unquote business is. So they were running all of these as cash operations. They didn't have an EIN number. They weren't filing taxes on it. It was all cash operations. But my brother and I were exposed to entrepreneurship at a very, very young age. And, we were out there throwing papers, and I was collecting photos, and both my brother and I were pulling down poison ivy and trees and everything else. So, we understood the work ethic aspect of it. Fast forward 20, 30 years later, both my brother and I are full-time entrepreneurs. So my brother is a Series 7 financial advisor. He owns his own brokerage firm. Yeah. And my full-time job is I own a dog boarding business. And just from working with Perry as he worked through his early stages of how to be a formal entrepreneur, what an EI number is, how do you file taxes, what do you do, what are the systems you need to have in place, how do you pay yourself, blah, 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 blah. He was able to coach me through starting up a dog boarding business from scratch. So I left corporate America. I started dog boarding because I love dogs. And I have all my business-ish together because of him. So that was fine. I've been doing that full time for years. And then I was like, I'm really passionate about gaming. Really love writing games. I really enjoy this space. I would like to move forward in it. Why don't I have a business centered around gaming? Let's do that. So I had the tools and the experience in place. So I literally just launched it again. And that's how that came about. And that's how she's doing currently. It's just another passion project that I decided, like, I'm going to take this out of the hobby space and make it something a little bit more formal, because it's something that I enjoy pursuing from a professional standpoint as well as a hobby standpoint.
Very nice. Because I know you mentioned earlier too about how it's like working the metrics, the visual perspectives and such. That's one of those other elements to this, which you also hit in here too. Because again, we are a untapped market in some regards beyond, classic cards, dice, and dominoes and so forth.
Yep.
Which again brings up that notion of there are other ways that we can enjoy gaming. God, just what we see with the video game industry as well.
Right.
Because I'll be frank, Madden and all the NBA games is like, don't even bother putting those on my system. The only reason I have them on any system is because it's something I have to do work with clients. Yeah. I will put on more things like, actually I'm presently playing Horizon Zero Dawn.
Okay.
The second game, which is a role-playing adventure game there, or I'm slowly working my way through Mass Effects, the trilogies as well as such. So those are the things that interest me more, which is still, in its own way, playing a role-playing game.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. Hands down. I had a thought and it fluttered away. Keep going. Sorry. I had a real thought and that thought went, nope. And took off down the street.
Oh, I know what you mean. I know. I've plenty of those too. But with that too is also the standpoint too of like, what are the other that enjoyment of where can I find more of the games that are focusing much more on our history and are having our aspects of it, such as dealing with where can we have not only more of a sword and soul fantasy setting, which is what I ended up having to do when I was with the personal game I was playing when I rebuilt Chult from Dungeons and Dragons to be that for us. Put it to you this way. Have you ever heard of the alchemy jar?
I have. Now, don't quote me on it, but I have heard of it. Yes.
Right. And so one of the classic things about the alchemy jar and the fact that it makes all these various chemicals and so forth, their oddest item they put on there is mayo. So
there's mayo in the alchemy jar. That's one of the charted things.
One of the 7 things it makes is mayo. And so when I put it in my Chult game, it's like, oh no, we're getting rid of the mayo. We're putting hot sauce in there.
Yes.
This alchemy jar makes hot sauce.
Oh my God.
But that was just my little twist. Is like, no, that does not work in this environment.
Right. But those little subtle changes make a big difference. This alchemy jar can spit out some hot sauce, and you can put that shit on everything.
Capsaicin. It's a chemical.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So looking at those sources where you can find games that are being designed for that and promoted, which I think there is a very much an underground environment for that. I know when I was speaking with the podcast that is coming out, because I'll be frank, we're recording this at the end of February, even though it's going to play in July. But right now, the podcast, one that I just recorded that's going to be coming out tomorrow, which is the 28th, is on Afrofuturism and mental health.
Ooh.
And so in our conversation with Dr. Lanny Brooks there, we were talking about all the games and the such, and I know I talked about Olorun. There's obviously Harlem Unbound and now the Haunted West. There's Orun, as well as I know there's one called Bastion, which is from, I guess, the Godsend or I'm blanking on the name right now, and I know they've actually got a Kickstarter running called Godsend at the moment.
I'm gonna hop on and see if I can find you.
But it's these materials that are centering stories that are not in Western world base. And I know another one I got is like Nahalo is one, and then there's Dragons Conquer America as well. So I know I'm giving for a free shout outs to all these game designers and such.
Yeah, you are. And listen, God bless you for it. I'm looking at the Bastion Afrocentric sword and sorcery fantasy right now.
Mm-hmm. So that's another one was like want to play, even if we don't use the actual system, I want to use the material.
Right. And since we're throwing them out there, I know I just got an email from Coyote and Crow.
Oh, yes.
They're getting ready to.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that book to arrive.
Stuff. Yeah, stunning. Can we talk about the aesthetics on Coyote and Crow? Mm-hmm. My God. Mm-hmm. Oh, I've scrolled through the PDF and yeah, I'm just here for it. I'm here for it. Primary example when you're looking at the Chris Spivey's and that amazing indigenous crew that's putting out Coyote and Crow. That goes back to what I was saying in the first half of like, what are you willing to sacrifice to bring forward that story or to bring forward that universe? Because it has not been easy for any of these companies that you put off, because you are going to have those people, and you know exactly who they are, that are going to fight tooth and nail. Oh my goodness, here we go again. The snowflakes are doing this. I think it's racist for you to say that, you know, that the world is indigenous now, or why are you? It's just, they go through, these producers, these companies, these writers go through so much grief. And I cannot imagine just the pure strength and the pure intentionality it takes to go, I don't care. I'm still going to do it. Watch me do me. Die mad about it.
Which actually leads, and this is in a different area, but still along the same lines, because I was reading something by Orion D recently talking about, I follow him on Patreon, talking about the aspect of how, like TTRP, which is what the shows, which is where I saw you at, have also become a marketing tool for these materials. And so what does it also take for these smaller producers to be able to get out there and deal with getting their slice of the pie, when obviously things like Dungeons and Dragons and such has some of the larger chunk of it, which is why I was very much working my way through all the Calyx stuff for Call of Cthulhu. And I've played a couple of Call of Cthulhu games, and my character did survive to the end of it, and I did have most of my sanity.
Hey, anomaly, but hey, we're here for it.
Yeah, we'll see if when the third time we get to play one of these games, I manage to survive.
But you hop on one of my tables, you know I'm going to be intentional. Like, now I have to kill him. He's gotten too comfortable.
We'll see how my survival instincts kick in there.
The keeper is gunning for me off of something that I said on a podcast. No.
But precisely that standpoint of getting more of these systems that we've talked about on shows like this, I'm just always curious in that aspect. How did you find yourself on the Calyx?
So the Calyx is organized by Becca Scott. Yeah, a Good Time Society. And Becca Scott walks on water. She's absolutely brilliant. So how did I? Oh, yeah. Okay, so what year is it right now? Jesus, 2022. So somewhere in 2021. Yeah, I know. Everything from late 2019, I feel like it's just a blur.
Yeah, that's dealing with trauma, the experiences. It affects the memory.
Oh my gosh, Lord Jesus. Yeah. Somewhere second or third quarter of 2021, I joined the Miskatonic University podcast, which is a talk podcast that literally focuses on nothing but weird and horrific role-playing games. So 90% of the games that we've mentioned here would be things that we discuss on the podcast. And then I was also picked up by Chaosium to be their community ambassador, basically a community liaison between you, the listener who wants to start publishing for a 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, and us, the publisher, that's like, yes, you can do it, and here's how. So the podcast, Miskatonic University podcast, brought on Becca Scott as a guest because we were trying to reach female voices, diverse voices. And, she's a heavy hitter in the industry. Like, she's brilliant. So we brought her onto the show. I fell absolutely in love with her on the show. And she made a passing statement to me. Oh, I love your energy. You should contact me and come onto the Calyx. Hard pause. At the point that we interviewed her, honest to God, I didn't know who Becca was prior to me getting onto the radio with her. I really didn't. I wasn't familiar with her. I had never watched the Calyx. I was brand new. So I thought she was just being nice. I honestly thought she was just being sweet and being nice. And a couple weeks later, one of the other co-hosts, Murph, reached out to me. He said, hey, did you ever email Becca? I was like, email Becca about what? He's like, about joining the Calyx. I was like, oh, she was just being nice. He's like, no, I don't think she was being nice. I think you need to reach out to her. I was like, well, I've never done streaming before. Here goes me and my insecurities. I've never done it before. So that means I can't do it. God bless me. I've never done it before. He's like, yeah, I'm sure she can help you out. And I can help you out with any more of the tech to get you there. But you need to email her and reach out to her. So I emailed her on some super insecure. Hey, it's Bridgett. You were on the show and you made a passing state. So if you want it, I'm interested. We were filming 3 weeks later. It's literally how I broke into streaming because, I overlapped with Becca and then a friend had me pretty much forced me to power through my insecurities to reach out to her. After I was seen on the Calyx, her viewership is absolutely ridiculous. The number she's pulls is fantastic. That's when I started getting pulled in other directions by Chaosium, Untold Stories projects, Library of Horrors, things of that nature.
Yeah, I also just watched this last week your first episode of the RuneQuest story too.
Yes,
and I love the way you played that character quite nicely. It's like, oh yes, I'm paying attention to everything that's going on here, but it's like, oh, I also know how to have a good party. It's like, whisper in your ear about this, whisper in your ear about that.
Right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. As a total aside, it's super funny. So I'm in 2 campaigns right now that are streamed. There is the RuneQuest one where I'm flirting with Bronze Age horror, and that character is a pre-gen. Is super salacious, is here for a good time. Really, she wants to have sex and party. It's really what she wants to do. That's written into the sheet. Another campaign that I'm on right now is Cuppy Cups Ain't Slayed Nobody, season 2. That's a actual play podcast. And I am playing an Afro-Asian brothel worker in that game. So I'm playing more or less a sex worker in 2 different games, which is absolutely hysterical because I identify as asexual. So from a mental health standpoint, that is also super exciting because I know how I feel, but making myself stretch to jump into 2 characters that are extremely high libidos and are just like, let's get it. Absolutely hysterical. And it's such a good time.
Well, own it.
Own it, and love it. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Exactly. So I think that's a lovely place for us to segue into my classic questions, the myths and realities of mental health. Although in this case, we can rephrase that as the mythos of mental health.
Oh, the mythos of mental health. Okay. I like that. You need to get a banner with that one, mate. Like a logo and a banner. You could rock with that one.
So what would you say is one of the mythos of mental health? And let's talk about the realities around it.
Yeah. Big one. Probably my biggest one that it comes to mind right now. And thank God this conversation is changing. People of color, Black people, you can go get help. You can go get mental health. You deserve that. You can be further supported. You can be further loved, and you can have a place that is literally about you for that hour, that half an hour, whatever you need. I understand that our society does not like Black people going to counseling. That has been a superstition and a prejudicial view that I've battled with my entire childhood. Black men, it is okay for you to go to a therapist. There is nothing about that is affecting your masculinity. There is nothing about that that's saying you don't have it together. Black people go through so much every single day. We wake up under pressure and we go to sleep with pressure too, with expectations from society, from within our own culture, from outside of the culture, from our media, from politics to absolutely everything. Do not gatekeep yourself out of feeling better. That is something that you can do as a reward to yourself and a way to love yourself. Black people, go. Therapy is okay. It is safe. You're not weird for going to therapy. Go do that. That's my biggest mythos.
Just like it's okay for us to play these games as well.
it is totally okay for you to play those games. And don't let people in your own community tell you that it's not.
Yeah, I know I said this in one of my other upcoming podcasts, which is coming out next month, with Dr. Elizabeth Sanchez. I had been at a convention prior to COVID, and I had this gentleman walk up to me as I was doing something else and asked me, the question was, why didn't he see more Black people at this game convention? And it turns out the other guy was also a therapist as well. So it's like,
oh, wow, shut the front door. Love it.
It's just like that. And I said, there were 3 reasons that I could identify.
Okay.
First and foremost was economic, to be able to be in a position where you could take the entire weekend to come just veg out at a gaming convention is not something we get, because it's a choice of pay the bills or not. And comfortably at that point, I was able to do that. Secondly was having racist experiences at the table. Yeah. All it takes is one experience and we're not coming back. Right. Because we deal with that on a daily basis. We got to deal with that shit when we're trying to do something that we enjoy. Exactly. And when we want to try and escape from that. Yeah. Which is, like I said earlier, is like dealing with reading anything for prior to 1970 that's a fantasy-based game is going to, or fantasy-based material or sci-fi-based material is going to also be littered with a lot of racism. Yep, for sure. So there's detriment number 2. And then detriment number 3 is we've touched on, even with our mythos, is the aspect of what is that social communal view of our interest in this when it, for quote unquote, deviates from what is supposed to be the established monolith of what we're supposed to be interested in. Right. No, all 3 of those are extremely valid. I'm going to skip that one. Actually, I'm going to say it and you can choose whether to edit or skip it. And I might make a suggestion after that too. So it's interesting you're talking about gaming conventions and people of color there. So I was lucky enough, honored enough, flattered enough. It's actually really cool. One of my first gaming groups that I had here in Columbus was all Black. Period. Whole table. Black. Blackity, black. Wonderful. 5 of us all playing Pathfinder in a friend's basement. Great. I'll say maybe 80% of that group, that all Black group, loves going to a major gaming convention that takes place here in Columbus, Origins. It's like 20,000 people. Whenever I see those players at Origins, it's always like, hey, what's up? I run, I hug them, I love them. You know, we get lunch and we hang out. But one thing they're very intentional about doing is hiding their badges. They take their badges and they hide them down their shirt. They will not wear any gaming shirts. So you're not going to catch them with any type of paraphernalia that indicates them or identifies them as a gainer. They hide their badges. And after a couple of years of this, I finally asked one of them, I was like, hey, why are you hiding your badge like this? Like, why? He's like, well, the majority of the custodial workers at this massive convention center are people of color. He says, and I'm just really tired of running into one of them in the bathroom or getting the weird looks on the staircases or catching the sly comments that they make under their breath when they walk past me. He said, I'm just tired of dealing with it. So it's easier for me to look neutral, where I could just be passing by, or I could be this versus being an active participant in the experience. And Perry, I think that's really interesting from an opposing thought, because I am the exact opposite. I was the one that's like wearing the D20 earrings and the D4 choker and the company shirts. And I was trying to draw as much attention to myself as possible. Apology there. We had a little hiccup in the connection there. You were talking about, I think, D20 earrings. Okay. So I was the exact opposite. I was wearing the D20 earrings and the D4 choker and the gaming shirts. I was trying to draw as much attention to myself as possible to convince all the white people in the convention I do belong here. Because I was tired of sitting at tables ready to play a game. And, some dude goes, hi, okay, have you ever played this game before? No, I've never actually played this one before. Okay, well, this is a D6. This is a D10. No, I know what the dice are, babe. Stop. I didn't ask for, I don't know this particular setting or so it's just so interesting that both as people of color, one is trying to hide from the other Black people at the convention center to save judgment. And I'm doing everything I can to throw myself out there to convince the white people, hey, I know what a D20 is. See, I have them in earrings. I know how to game. Can you stop? Interesting experiences. No, we're definitely keeping this in because this is part of that struggle with also mental health between what our interests in are, who's accepting it, who's not accepting it, how do we sit and balance that when it is something that is helping keep us sane in this world.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. I was weary about that one on the front end, but thank you. Good. I'm glad.
And balancing, again, the notion of how do we appear to white? How do we appear within our own community?
Yeah, because we were chasing two very different outcomes. He was worried about the custodial workers judging him, making snide comments. And I was tired of being mollycoddled when I sat on the table. Like, okay, welcome to a role-playing game. Like, dude.
Gotta go and coming, and that can be exhausting, and that can push people away from the things that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Which is not good for their mental health.
No, it's not. Especially with something that can be such a major asset to your mental health, because gaming can honestly be such a comfort and such a distraction, and even such a way to explore parts of you that you aren't comfortable exploring elsewhere.
Very much so. Well, I think that's a beautiful place for us to wrap at. So where can folks find you if they want to learn more and work with more and make a connection to some more gaming groups that are focusing on people of color?
Yeah, so easiest way to reach out to me is going to be through the website at symphonyentertainment.com. If you're nosy and want to see just where you can find me on podcasts or actual plays, if you hit press release, you'll be able to see all that fun stuff. You'll be able to see all the products that I have published and ready for purchase. Even some upcoming projects will be on there as well. Don't holler at me on Twitter. I don't know how Twitter works. Somebody made me create an account, but if you hit me up on Twitter, you will stay on unread for all times. If you are interested in writing for 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, I'm not really quite sure what you can do, what you can't do, how to go forward, please feel free to email me. My email address is Bridgett at chaosium.com. That's Bridgett, bridge that you walk across with 2 T's at chaosium.com. And then last but not least, if you would like to hear me ramble and giggle about weird and horrific role-playing games, you can check me out as a co-host on the Miskatonic University podcast. You can check that out at mu-podcast.com.
All right. We'll have some of that in the show notes. So I want to thank you very much for being on here and have a great conversation. And I hope my listeners also enjoy it. And tune in more. We're going to have a few more, and I'm going to work on seeing if I can get my hands on Lisa Pearl to come on as be a guest here too, because I'd love to have the conversation about the Afro-Latina experience she had doing in Bruja on Calyx. And this is Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Bridgett Jeffries. So be safe, be fun. Definitely look at trying to roll a D6. And
yes.
We'll catch you on the flip side. And remember, if you look into the undead and the dreams of it, you may go insane.
Oh.
And there's only so much skill I've gotten dealing with a Call of Cthulhu monster. But I'll try. Later, folks.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.